Yo, what's up, Devin?
Hey, what's going on, Dave?
Man, not a whole lot. Super excited to be back on the podcast. For those of y'all listening, we are also filming this one, so you'll be able to find it on our YouTube page. But super excited to be on the podcast. We got our friend, our brother in Christ, Mike Austin, on with us. Um, I know Mike was on an episode back in 2019, 2020, talking about being a coach and being a professor and all those sorts of things. But if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go check it out. But Mike, could you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm a professor of philosophy at Eastern Kentucky University, where I've been since 2004. And yeah, I teach and write a lot in ethics. Soccer coach, so preseason just started working on that. And yeah, one wife, three kids, down to one dog. So
All right, Lupa.
Mike, I just noticed
yeah,
you got tatted. That wasn't there last time we interviewed you.
I
that's
know.
true. I'm going through a midlife crisis. So
I'm
Next
sure there
time he's
could
on,
be,
he's gonna have a full sleeve and some earrings.
yeah, I'm sure
yeah,
there could be
exactly right.
there could be worse things you can get involved in. So it's just a
Yeah,
slow
that's right.
process into turning into Bono.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just gotta work on the hair and sunglasses, but I'll get there.
There you go. There you go. Well, you're very humble, Mike. I think that you undersell yourself because I feel like you do a lot more than just be a professor and write a little bit here and there. But um, really, we could sit and talk for hours about lots of different stuff. You're one of my favorite people to converse with. Chiefs fan. My Bengals beat you twice last year. I mean, we could talk about a lot of stuff.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? But
ring baby.
we'll get right into it. So I guess it was 2020 that your book released.
Yeah, May of 2020.
So
Yeah, God and Guns in America. Yeah, gosh, that's 2 years, over 2 years ago now.
2 years ago, that your book's in its almost out of its rookie contract here. So
Yeah, almost.
could you just briefly, for those who don't know, could you give kind of like a Cliff Notes 30-second high level overview of what the book is about?
Yeah, so the main idea of the book is that the main thesis is that we can reduce gun violence in the United States in a variety of ways while still protecting the rights of responsible gun owners. So that's big picture. There's a little bit of history and Second Amendment stuff, and that's just kind of setting the stage. And then I talk really to focus on Christian ethics and guns, both from a theological, scriptural, philosophical point of view. I'm thinking through about some of the bad arguments both sides give. The last chapter then is just some suggestions for possible ways forward, both in the sort of the policy realm, but also in, I guess, what I would just call the moral and spiritual realm, things that we can do as the church to try to address this issue.
Yeah, so the first time we talked, it was just briefly about it. There there was another school shooting, and unfortunately we're back again in 2022 with another. And what has changed? What laws have changed since the last time we talked?
Um, Federally, none
Okay, okay.
that I'm aware of. Yeah, I'd have to check for sure, but for sure, none that have been aimed at reducing gun violence. Right.
Okay. So that's kind of where I wanted to get at to start, because when we first started, it was more of like a philosophical, if it happens again, this is something like you don't expect these things to happen. Like me personally, I don't. But they keep it's almost like it's a yearly thing now. And we get shocked and nothing happens. And now I'm at this point where I'm like, well, we got to do something. Like some kind of law has to change, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on. I would just be okay with an attempt, and then at least with the attempt to change something, different things can happen from there. So I'm from Ohio, and one of the things that the governor just did there is he wrote a law. It's in law now that counties can have teachers carry guns, which to me is another wild concept, but it's something, right? And I'm not necessarily in favor for that, because I think how are you going to tell teachers who can't afford books and supplies for their own classrooms that now we have the money for guns and ammo. That's a whole different conversation. But what I'm trying to say is there's something. So like you said, federally, there's nothing. So I want to just throw out a large hypothetical. If you could just do one broad overreaching law right now, just hypothetically, what would your federal idea be?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's not going to be one magic one that solves it all, of course, but a set of them can reduce it. So anyway, I think, yeah, I would say a federal extreme risk protection order law, or red flag law, what they're more commonly called, that's well written, that requires due process, so that anyone that tries to abuse the law would be, there's sufficient penalty for that and accountability. But yeah, you see in some of these cases with school shooters and other kind of mass shootings, since that's our focus recently, although that's just a minuscule part of gun violence, a lot of the issue is sometimes people even try to do something and no one listens to them, or they don't know what to do. So if we could have something like that, because those have been proven to work at the state level. And so even though it's been a few years, I write about one of those state red flag laws in my book from Maryland. I think it's Montgomery County, Maryland. And they had a red flag law. They've had one in place, and the sheriff talked about within a certain, excuse me, within a certain time period, they had 300 cases where firearms were removed, and 6 of those were potential school shootings. And so, and I guess just to, because some people may not be aware, red flag law essentially is, it allows a family member, neighbor, police, medical professional, whoever, if, let's say, they know somebody, like in my family, that has a gun or guns, and I think it's a good reason to worry they're a danger to themselves or others, then you can basically submit to the courts, right, this extreme risk, or request for extreme risk protection order. There's a hearing. If the court finds that there's no basis for it, the person gets to keep their guns. If there is, they get them removed for, I think it depends on the state, maybe upwards of a year, where there's a second hearing, and then they can have their guns returned or not. So it's a way to get the, firearms out of the hands of somebody who shouldn't have them at the moment. And I think that's actually something from friends and colleagues I know who are much more kind of strong, tend to be against any new gun laws. That's one that you see more people being in favor of. So I think there's some common ground on that one. But yeah, we'll see. That's what I would do, though, if I just had to pick one today.
Yeah, Dave, I think in one of our conversations earlier this week, I think you had mentioned something like that in Maryland, where that being effective.
I stole that from Mike. So.
Oh, see, look at him.
There you go. Can't get away from me.
Yeah. So I obviously have the book. I listened to 2 or 3 podcasts that you were on in the last week or two, from back in 2020, when you were kind of promoting the book, I guess, and people had reached out to you and were asking questions of you. And so, one thing that we've always strived to do on this podcast, and that I think we should try to do as Christians, is to approach these issues biblically, and approach them from the perspective of, like, how do we look at this from, a loving and moral and decent perspective, as believers. So, I think the law, that's fantastic. I mean, from all I've heard and listened to, like, that seems like a great first step if we can, get that in place. But, you are pro Second Amendment, right? Like, I don't think that's any a secret. You own guns and whatnot. But, how do we look at gun ownership from a Christian perspective? How do we see that, and how do we process through whether or not it's okay even to own a gun?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really hard question because the one, the ones I own are a couple, from growing up. I read about this some in the book. In Griffin, Kansas, a family where hunting and like going to the gun range, shoot, trap, and skeet, those kind of things was just normal. It's like my dad's main recreational thing, which he still does today. It never was really about like self-defense or being an armed citizen or something like that. And so that's something that's changed a lot. So there are very few, I would say, moral problems with ownership for recreation and hunting, those kind of things. But then when it enters the realm of self-defense, or defending property, or people that, and we've seen this more past 5 or 6 years, people that, like, I guess just called armed citizenship, right? People that want to like play the role of police and be armed in public. Then we have some deeper problems for sure. And so I mentioned this probably in some of the podcasts you heard and that you listened to, and still, yeah, it's still the case. I think the Second Amendment, right? I think there's a valid reasoning for that, right? For basic gun rights. But of course, even the Supreme Court's found that's consistent with restrictions on who can have guns, where they can have them, what kind. So a lot of the argument today is just about more the cliches. You can't give any ground, right? Or they'll take our guns away. Well, that's just ignores the history of the law. But back to the biblical point, as a Christian, like reading through even the Old Testament, which we tend to think of as more violent, but there's a lot of anti-violence. There's a strong anti-violence thread in the Old Testament that I think we easily ignore. Even I was reading in the Psalms yesterday, the day before, right, about God hating violence, and God doesn't allow David to come into the sanctuary because he's a warrior that shed blood. And so they're hard questions for sure. But over the time writing the book, I definitely moved even not a pacifist, but a lot closer to that view that there needs to be a lot heavier burden placed as a Christian on when violence is justified. And one thing that really concerns me is Christians who almost celebrate it, right? So I've seen this on social media and even talking to people over the years where violence is celebrated or like relished, or that's not Christian. I mean, that's just it's just counter to scripture, right?
I think there's a difference between gun lovers and gun nuts, and so I mean, in a lot of ways, United States is unique in that we have so much freedoms with the guns that we can purchase, and so many people have the similar stories to you, Mike, is that they've grown up with guns around the house, and it's just been a part of, almost like a part of how they grew up, and it was their heritage. Mm-hmm. Now you have the other side of it, that they might have grown up with it, but it now becomes their identity, and they become almost offensive or aggressive with their purchase and use of guns, like waiting for someone to do something that looks like it's offensive to react to it. And I think that's when it becomes dangerous. And I think also couple that with where we've gone in the last, 7 to 8 years with owning another party. And so you want to dominate this other party. And so part of that becomes their nationalistic identity, which guns becomes a part of that. And now you can't lose a step because this is so much a part of you and your political identity that you have now. And that's when it becomes dangerous, I think, is when it becomes like an ideology instead of just something that you do.
Yeah, and I think what's happened is, look, anything from a Christian perspective, biblical perspective, anything can be an idol. Sports, well, that's a little too close to home, so we won't talk about that. But honestly, sports, a person, I mean, yeah, human beings make anything, but you can own guns and then not be an idol in your life for sure. But I think this isn't for me, just some of the reading I did kind of working on the book. Guns do have some special features that lend themselves to that, right? There's a sense of power, right, in having a firearm. I even talked to Yeah, podcast is on a guy, actually former Kansas City Chief, who's getting a philosophy PhD because that's the way we roll with the Chiefs, Renaissance men.
They don't win often, but you know what? They learn though.
All right then. How are the Browns doing?
I was gonna say the
Coming
guy
from a
from
Browns guy.
Cleveland.
Hey Dave, when's the last time the Bengals beat the Browns? Okay, keep going, Mike.
This is going south. What was he even talking about? Sorry.
You were talking
about idols.
Oh
idols.
yeah. So yeah, just the power of life and death, right? In them. Oh yeah, the guy. So the friend of mine, he talked about, after reading the book, and we were discussing this, like, because he has a firearm, he carries it, and he noticed that when he would take it with him out, as he started reflecting on it, an attitude change, and like a change in his mindset, sort of this aggressive, you don't want to mess with me, not a huge one, but a subtle one. That's an issue. And so, yeah, I just think so the power of guns, it goes into the identity point that you're talking about, Devin, where guns can become fused with family identity, with political identity, religion gets mixed in there, all those kind of things. And I remember talking to someone at EKU before the book was coming out, and she asked, I heard you're writing a book called God and Guns in America. And I said, yeah. And she goes, that's what we believe in, God and guns. Now, what does that mean? I mean, I kind of know what it means, but if we just stop and think, those are the things you believe in, God and guns, that's really troubling from a Christian perspective. So that we would even elevate, let's just say she meant, we believe that you should be able to have a gun and have strong Second Amendment rights, but to elevate that in the same sentence with God, that's a problem.
I mean, if we're being honest, the average American, if they're waiting for someone to defend their homes or whatever, even if you live in some of the most violent parts of America, the chances are your gun is collecting dust.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the only purpose that you want to use, that's the chances are it's collecting dust. And I'm a pro 2A guy, and I'm just being realistic about them. They're fun to shoot around, like you said, to go to the range, to go trap and skeet. All those things are fun, but I mean, and there is an element of being, having that confidence to defend yourself and your own property. But I think sometimes we can go overboard with some of the, like, and how we defend guns like it's God, and that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, and I think I guess I'm worried too. I mean, look, the evidence of the data is that people that buy guns for self-defense tend to be middle to upper middle class, suburban and rural white people, who statistically are also the ones that are least likely to need a gun for self-defense. So that's interesting. That's where sometimes I think fear can come into play.
And on that same note, do you know, like, every time I bring up this conversation to someone, they always mention Chicago. Like, what about Chicago? What about this violent area? Do you know where people get their guns in Chicago? Chicago has all these restrictive laws about purchasing guns. They go to Indiana.
Yeah.
They go right next door. They bring them back, or they go south. They go like Mississippi or something. I mean, these are places where people are buying the guns. They're not buying them in Illinois. They're not buying them in Chicago. They're coming over. And so what about, Chicago that makes these things so interesting is that it's not the Chicagoans that are selling these people the guns to do, these acts. It's the other states that are doing it.
Yeah, and a lot of junk guns, cheap ones get shipped in there. I mentioned this in the book. They traced back within a certain year period. Chicago police traced back guns that were confiscated, like in criminal act from criminals, like in criminal actions. I want to say it's around 20% to one gun store just across the line in Indiana.
Yeah.
The Chicago. I mean, just drive you up a wall. What about Chicago? I'm like, well, that's like saying I'm here in Richmond. Let's say marijuana is illegal here, but every surrounding county it's legal, and then there's more marijuana here than anywhere else. Why is it? See, the laws don't work. Well, yeah, of course they don't work when you can just, you know,
10 minutes and get it.
yeah. So, and yeah,
By the way,
those kind of,
marijuana is not legal in any surrounding counties to Richmond, Kentucky, in case anyone listening was
that's right. So don't get excited, kids. Yeah, not so anyway, yeah, I think that's right. And I think I would say this from back to the main question. A friend of mine, Rob Shank, there's a documentary called The Armor of Light. You can see it free online. It's kind of his journey about gun rights issues. And he mentioned when he actually went through like sort of self-defense firearms training. And the first day, right, that he was there, the instructor said, if you're going to, what he tells everybody, if you're going to carry a firearm in public or just have one for self-defense, you have to decide right now that you're willing to kill another person. Like you have to have that settled conviction in your heart and mind. Otherwise, you're more of a danger to yourself and others by having that firearm present. And I think as Christians in America, it's so easy to just think self-defense or defend my property. And we live in a culture awash with violence, right? Whether it's military violence, violence in the media, violence in our words, violence in our politics. And so it's just, if we just stop for a minute and think even that, and I'm not saying that killing in self-defense is wrong. I think it's a lot harder question than we want to make it as Christians. But you have to say, I'm willing to end the life of another human being made in God's image. Self-defense, okay, there's some arguments there. But I recently this week, someone was saying, trying to justify somebody comes into your house, steals some of your stuff, and as they're leaving your house, it's okay to shoot them in the back. I'm just like,
no,
as Christians,
never.
They can have that stuff.
I mean, I don't know if the guy was a Christian. He was using Christian language, but the bottom line is that's there's some gray areas for me. There's no gray there. You don't kill another human being over property. Take my car, whatever. That's just from a Christian moral perspective, spiritual perspective. Yeah, it's not right. I don't want someone to come take my stuff. I'm not going to kill them over it. So yeah, and I think too, we just don't realize the weight of that. So I tell people what I think in the book and why, but I want people just to wrestle with it and not just have a few cliches that justify their choices, because it's not that easy.
That's what I found, is that a lot of people just repeat the things they see on TV or internet, and that's their main talking points as to why they want to defend their rights of guns. And I mean,
yeah,
like I said again, I'm pro-gun. I'm pro-Second Amendment, but but it gets to a point where I'm willing to, if it means that other people can be safer, I'm willing to go through extra steps to make sure that other people are safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I find it so unique too. And I think you kind of touched on this, Mike, is like, we've become so desensitized to these sorts of things. Like I was actually telling somebody a week or two ago about having you on and like how excited I was to, have this conversation. And I had looked it up online. There's a government website that tracks all shootings over one person. Right. So like basically, if more than one person is involved in a shooting, it tracks it. And basically, it was like in 30 days, there was like 36 shootings of over one person. And I was talking to them and I was just like, mass shootings are such a problem. And it's like, it's not just, one-on-one violence. Like you see this all the time. And like, that's such an issue. And I said the word mass shooting and they were like, that's only 3 people. I'm like, that's 3 people. That's, like, or whatever the case was, Uvalde was 21 people. Like any life lost is a tragedy. Right. And I think that you're touching on that point is like, we have to be more considerate about that. And I think that that's where, like, if you listen to the show ever, if you listen to any conversation that I've ever had, like, my goal is to like be considerate about those sorts of things, especially from a biblical perspective, is like we have to be considerate of these things. And no matter what, whether you say, hey, look, I'm choosing to not own a gun, or I'm choosing to own 10, or I'm choosing to say, hey, look, like, I think that there should be laws or restrictions in place, or I don't think there should be. Whatever your stance is, like, be considerate of it. And like what Devin is saying, like, I don't think we can just take this issue as like a talking point from our favorite news source, right? And that would be my urge, especially to anybody that listens to the show, or any Christians out there, is like, I think we have to be considerate of this beyond just, hey, look, here's what, you know, even my parents say, or my siblings say, or, my politicians say. Like, there's got to be consideration beyond that.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
so
really important.
so Mike, the person who said that they could shoot a person in the back, if they live in Kentucky, that's illegal. So you might want to warn them about that. And then
Yeah.
Mike, not Mike, but Dave, the person that says it's only 3 people, it's really hard to maintain a pro-life stance if you're willing to sacrifice 3 people for your quote unquote rights that are given by the government that you don't even trust in the first place.
Yeah, and it's just like, I think that desensitization, I don't know if I said that right, but the desensitizing of violence is really an issue. And I'm with you, Mike. Like, I wouldn't say I'm a pacifist, but like, I definitely like lean towards, like, whatever the path of least violent
Mhm.
track is, would be, kind of where I stand on that. But I just, we can talk about laws all day. We can talk about, the morals and ethics of it. But, what do you think? And again, this is hypothetical and philosophical, but like, what do you think is the logical next step that we can take as everyday people in this kind of space that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we, this is going to sound like, well, I mean, as Christians, we just have to start taking seriously, the great commandment: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself. And that when we pray the Lord's Prayer, the part where it says, "Your kingdom come, your will be done." Too many of us think, "Oh, that's for the next life," and yeah, that's when kingdom comes in its fulfillment. But then it says, "On earth as it is in heaven," like on earth right now. So, like when you think about the Old Testament image of in God's kingdom, that swords are going to be beaten into plowshares, right? That people will study war no more, those kind of things. Yeah, of course, there's not going to be some perfect utopia, but the whole part of the point of the church in the world is to manifest and bring as much of that kingdom as we can. And I don't mean by kingdom, you know, enforcing Christianity with the laws like some people might want to do. I'm talking about just, yeah, a world of more righteousness, more justice, more peace. You got to start thinking that way, because we should, as Christians, look honestly, and we all have to. I have to guard against this too. Too many of us are discipled more by. Sorry, I'm losing my earbud. Too many of us are discipled by MSNBC or Fox or CNN or our favorite website, or podcast in our the podcast we listen to or whatever, not by someone in our church and by Jesus, right? So we need to have our hearts and minds formed by the Spirit, by the Word, by our community of believers that we're a part of. Um, yeah. So, but yeah, I think there's good evidence that people are. The way it's put is that people's political beliefs are upstream of their religious or theological ones in many cases, right? So what we say as a Christian belief often is formed by our political commitments and that's backwards, right? Should want our political views to be shaped by our commitments to Christ, not vice versa.
Man, you sound like you've been reading some Bonhoeffer.
It's true.
I wanted to add one piece of that, and this is something that I feel like every time there's some sort of tragedy, involving gun violence or anything like that, you have like this group of people that are like, invade the internet with thoughts and prayers. You have this group of people that invade the internet with extreme action, and then the other groups of people that are just like, hey, the extreme action isn't enough, and thoughts and prayers, you should do more than that. Right? Like, whatever you have like these, like, tribes, right? And so again, kind of pointing back to the Christian perspective is like we can always do more than pray, but we can never do less than pray. And so I don't want to, again, this is kind of in defense of, prayer. Like we need to be prayerful about it. And I say that because I see so oftentimes, people attacking Christians for being prayerful or having that kind of initial position. And, in a way they're kind of right. Cause like you can't just pray about it, but at the end of the day, that's gotta be our baseline. And I think that all too often we can discount prayer. I think we sell God short way too often in that, and that we don't seek him. And I think that's the biggest, the biggest problem we have internally as people is that we don't trust God. And so I think that, we can always do more than pray, but we can never do less. And so I would urge you to be prayerful about these things as another step, but then don't just stop there. Think about the ways that you can, have these conversations with other people and remind them that, especially if they, really have had their life changed by the gospel. Like we can't just be long arms of the NRA or our favorite politician or whatever it might be.
Well, Mike, on that note, this has been an amazing time with you. Always a pleasure getting to hear from the officially unofficial philosopher of the Dave and Dave podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we appreciate your time.
That's good. I'm going to add that to my email signature.
Yes. Thank you. And before we sign off, we're recording this on June 18th. By the time this comes out, I think Juneteenth have already passed, but I want to wish everybody happy Juneteenth. If you don't know about it, read about it. And
I'm wearing my Juneteenth hat. Look at this, man. I'm wearing my official. I don't really like Detroit, but the logo I thought was cool.
So if you don't know about it, Google it. Google's for free. But on that note, everyone, Mike, again, it's been a pleasure. But on that note,
we'll link the book in the podcast notes as well, so that way anybody who wants to check it out can go there and look it up. But like Devin said, thanks for being on. Until next time.
Peace.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.